The late afternoon sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting a golden glow across Jamie's little slice of suburban paradise. The house wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a sagging porch, and a roof that probably needed replacing in the next decade, but the yard? That was Jamie's pride and joy. A patchwork of wildflowers spilled over the edges of raised beds, their unruly blooms swaying in the breeze like a middle finger to the manicured lawns that dominated the neighborhood. After months of unpacking boxes and dodging memories of a marriage that had crashed and burned, Jamie finally felt like they could breathe here. This was their fresh start, their sanctuary, bought with the last of their savings and a stubborn hope that life could still be good. They knelt in the dirt that Saturday, hands caked with soil, planting a cluster of marigolds they'd picked up from the nursery. The divorce had left them raw, 2 years of Eric's nitpicking, his constant, "Why can't you just do it my way," still echoing in their head, but out here, with the earth under their nails and the hum of bees overhead, Jamie felt a flicker of peace. They wiped sweat from their brow and stood, admiring the chaos of color. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. That's when they heard the gate creak. Jamie turned, expecting maybe a neighbor kid chasing a ball or the mailman cutting through. Instead, there stood a woman in her 50s, her blonde bob so stiff it might have been shellacked, her lips pursed into a thin line of disapproval. She wore a pastel cardigan despite the heat and clutched a clipboard like it was a weapon. Jamie didn't recognize her, but the vibe she gave off screamed homeowners association louder than a megaphone. "Can I help you?" Jamie asked, brushing dirt off their jeans. They kept their tone neutral, though something about the woman's pinched expression set their teeth on edge. "I'm Karen Withers, HOA board member," she said, her voice clipped and nasal, like she was announcing royalty. "I'm doing a routine inspection of the block. Your yard caught my eye." She didn't step closer, just stood there at the edge of the property line, her gaze raking over the wildflowers like she was sizing up a crime scene. Jamie crossed their arms, forcing a smile. "Caught your eye? That's flattering. I've been working on it." Karen didn't smile back. She scribbled something on her clipboard, the scratch of her pen loud in the quiet afternoon. "These flowers," she said, gesturing vaguely, "they're unkempt. The HOA has guidelines about maintaining a uniform aesthetic. This," she waved a hand at the marigolds, "looks like a wheat patch." Jamie blinked, the words sinking in slow. A weed patch? They'd spent hours out here, coaxing life from the soil, and this woman, this stranger, had the gall to waltz up and call it trash. "They're wildflowers," Jamie said, keeping their voice steady. "They're supposed to look natural." "Natural isn't the point," Karen replied, her eyes narrowing. "The point is cohesion. This neighborhood has standards, and I'm here to enforce them." She jotted another note, then glanced up, her expression softening into something that might have been pity if it weren't so condescending. "I'll let it slide this time, since you're new. But I suggest you review the bylaws. We don't tolerate eyesores." Jamie's jaw tightened. They wanted to snap back, to tell her where she could shove her bylaws, but they'd dealt with enough petty tyrants in their life to know that arguing with someone like this was like wrestling a pig in mud. You just got dirty, and the pig enjoyed it. "Thanks for the tip," they said instead, clipped and cold. "I'll look into it." Karen nodded, satisfied, and turned to leave. The gate squeaked shut behind her, and Jamie watched her march down the sidewalk, clipboard swinging like a guillotine blade. They exhaled hard, shaking their head. "Unbelievable," they muttered, kicking at a clod of dirt. It wasn't a big deal, they told themselves. Just some busybody with too much time on her hands. They'd ignore her, keep their head down, and enjoy their damn garden. But the next morning, there it was, a pastel pink envelope taped to their front door, the kind of thing you'd expect from a kid selling cookies, not a grown-ass woman playing yard cop. Jamie ripped it open, already dreading what they'd find. Inside was a handwritten note, the cursive so aggressively neat it looked like it had been practiced for hours. "Dear resident, as discussed, your landscaping does not comply with Willow Creek HOA standards. Please trim and organize your flower beds by next week to avoid further action. Regards, Karen Withers, HOA Board. Jamie stared at the note, their pulse ticking up. Further action, they said aloud, incredulous. What is she gonna do, fine me over marigolds? They crumpled the paper and tossed it into the recycling bin, but the irritation lingered, buzzing under their skin like a mosquito they couldn't swat. They stepped outside, glaring at the flowers as if they'd betrayed them. The wild sprawl of petals suddenly felt defiant, a quiet rebellion against Karen's sterile little world. Good. Let her hate it. They grabbed their coffee and sat on the porch, sipping slowly, trying to shake it off. It was one note, one annoying encounter. They'd dealt with worse, Eric's tantrums, the lawyers, the endless court dates. This was nothing. But as they watched a sparrow peck at the bird feeder, a shadow moved at the edge of their vision. Karen's car, a spotless white SUV, rolled by, slow as a predator stalking prey. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just stared at the yard with that same pinched look before driving off. Jamie set their mug down, the ceramic clinking hard against the wood. Okay, they said to no one, voice low and tight. You wanna play, Karen? Fine. Let's see how long you last. They didn't know it yet, but the war had just begun. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy, or at least, what Jamie hoped would stay normal. They went to work, watered the wildflowers, and tried to ignore the pink notes still crumpled in the recycling bin. But Karen's presence lingered like a bad smell, creeping into their thoughts every time they glanced out the window. They'd catch themselves scanning the street, half expecting her white SUV to roll by again, her beady eyes locked on their yard. It was ridiculous, they told themselves. She was just some HOA busybody, not a supervillain. Still, the unease stuck. It started small. Monday morning, Jamie found a citation tucked under their windshield wiper, $25 for excessive lawn height. The grass wasn't even an inch over the HOA's precious 2-inch limit, but there it was, printed in black and white, signed with Karen's looping signature. Jamie snorted, tossing it onto the passenger seat. Excessive, they muttered. Right. They'd pay it later, if only to avoid the hassle. But then Tuesday brought another one, $10 for unauthorized garden decor. The culprit? A chipped ceramic gnome Jamie's mom had given them years ago, half hidden by the daisies. By Wednesday, there were 3 more citations pinned to their mailbox like a petty trophy display, each one nitpickier than the last. Jamie's patience was fraying, but they held it together. They'd dealt with control freaks before. Eric had been the king of them, always hovering, always correcting, turning every little thing into a battle. You're folding the towels wrong, he'd snap, or, why can't you just park straight? It had worn Jamie down until they barely recognized themselves. They weren't about to let Karen pull the same crap. So they ignored the citations, stacking them on the kitchen counter like a paper fortress, and kept tending their garden. If she wanted a fight, she'd have to try harder. She did. Thursday evening, Jamie was sprawled on the couch, half watching some mindless reality show, when they heard it, the faint crunch of gravel outside. They muted the TV and sat up, ears straining. There it was again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, right along the side of the house. Their heart kicked up a notch. Burglar? Stray cat? They grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window, peering through the blinds. Karen stood in the dusk, her silhouette sharp against the fading light, a ruler in one hand and that damn clipboard in the other. She was measuring the grass, actually measuring it, her lips moving like she was muttering to herself. Jamie's mouth dropped open. You've got to be kidding me, they whispered, disbelief warring with a sudden, hot surge of anger. This wasn't just nosy anymore. This was obsessive. They flung the door open and stepped onto the porch, the cool air hitting their face. Hey, they called, voice sharp. Karen froze, ruler halfway to the ground, and turned slowly, like a kid caught sneaking cookies. For a split second, Jamie thought she'd bolt, but then her expression hardened, that smug little smirk curling her lips. "Good evening," she said, as if she weren't standing 10 feet from Jamie's front door with no invitation. "I'm just ensuring compliance." "Compliance?" Jamie echoed, stepping closer. "You're on my property with a ruler, Karen. What the hell is this?" "It's my responsibility," she said, straightening up. "The HOA tasked me with maintaining standards, and your yard," she gestured at the wildflowers, the gnome, the whole messy, beautiful chaos, "is a problem. I'm documenting it." Jamie laughed, short and bitter. "Documenting it? You're trespassing. You don't get to waltz onto my land whenever you feel like it." Karen's smirk didn't waver. "The HOA bylaws allow inspections with reasonable notice. Consider this your notice." She scribbled something on her clipboard, the sound grating on Jamie's nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "Reasonable notice means you knock on my door, not sneak around like a creep," Jamie shot back, their voice rising. "And I don't care what your bylaws say, this is my house, my yard. Back off." Karen tilted her head, studying them like they were a disobedient puppy. "You're new here," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You'll learn how things work. Or you'll face consequences." She turned on her heel, her cardigan flapping like a cape, and marched back to the sidewalk, leaving Jamie fuming in her wake. They stood there, fists clenched, watching her disappear around the corner. The adrenaline buzzed in their veins, and for a moment, they were back in that old apartment, Eric looming over them, picking apart every choice they made. The memory hit hard, his voice, his control, the way he'd made them feel small. "Not again," Jamie muttered, shaking their head. "Not this time." They stormed inside and grabbed their phone, dialing their friend Sam. He picked up on the second ring, his voice lazy and warm. "Hey, what's up?" "You won't believe this," Jamie said, pacing the kitchen. "This HOA lady, Karen, she's losing her mind over my yard. She's out there measuring my grass like it's a federal crime." Sam chuckled. "What, like with a tape measure?" "A ruler," Jamie corrected, their voice tight. "She's been leaving citations all week, and now she's sneaking around my house. It's insane." "Sounds like she needs a hobby," Sam said. "Or a life. You okay?" Jamie sighed, rubbing their temple. "I don't know. It's stupid, but it's getting to me. Reminds me of, you know." Sam went quiet for a beat. "Eric?" "Yeah," Jamie admitted, their throat tightening. "The way he'd hover, always finding something wrong. I thought I was done with that." "You are," Sam said firmly. "This Karen chick's not him. She's just a power-tripping nutjob. Don't let her in your head." "I'm trying," Jamie said, glancing out the window. The yard looked peaceful now, the flowers swaying in the dark, but they could still feel Karen's eyes on it. "I just want her to leave me alone." "She will," Sam said. "Or you'll make her. You've got this." Jamie hung up, feeling a little steadier, but the anger didn't fade. They stared at the stack of citations, then out at the garden, their space. Karen thought she could control it, control them. She was wrong. If she wanted to push, Jamie would push back. They just didn't know how yet. The weekend rolled in with a deceptive calm, the kind of quiet that tricks you into thinking the storm's past. Jamie spent Saturday morning in the yard, determined to reclaim their peace. They yanked weeds, watered the wildflowers, and even added a few new snapdragons to spite Karen's uniform aesthetic nonsense. The citations still sat on the counter, unpaid and ignored, but Jamie wasn't ready to deal with them yet. They just wanted one day, one damn day, without her shadow creeping over their life. By evening, the air had cooled, and Jamie was inside, sprawled on the couch with a beer and a half-eaten pizza. The TV flickered with some old action movie, the kind where the hero takes no crap and wins every fight. Jamie smirked, imagining themselves decking Karen's smug face instead of paying her fines. It was a nice fantasy, anyway. They were mid-sip when a noise cut through the explosions on screen, a sharp, rustling snap from the backyard. They muted the TV and sat up, ears pricked. It came again, a crunch, then a faint grunt. "What the hell?" Jamie muttered, setting the beer down. They grabbed their phone, camera ready, just in case, and slipped out the back door, the wood creaking under their bare feet. The yard was dark, the moon half hidden behind clouds, but there was no mistaking the figure hunched over their flower bed. Karen. She was on her knees, her pastel cardigan swapped for a dark jacket, but that stiff blonde bob gave her away. She had a trowel in one hand, digging into the soil like a grave robber, and a pile of uprooted wildflowers lay beside her, their roots dangling like broken limbs. Jamie's stomach dropped, then ignited with a fury so hot it blurred their vision. "What the hell are you doing?" they roared, storming across the yard. Karen jolted, the trowel slipping from her grip, and scrambled to her feet, dirt smudging her pristine slacks. For a split second, she looked caught, eyes wide, mouth open, but then that smug mask slammed back into place. "I'm correcting a violation," she said, brushing her hands off like she hadn't just been caught red-handed. "These weeds are a blight. I warned you." Jamie's voice shook with rage. "Weeds? You're tearing up my flowers, you psycho. This is my property, get the fuck out." Karen didn't budge. She crossed her arms, clipboard nowhere in sight but her authority still dripping from every word. "The HOA has the right to enforce standards," she said, calm as if she were reading a grocery list. "You ignored my citations, so I took action. You should thank me." "Thank you." Jamie stepped closer, close enough to smell her floral perfume over the earthy tang of torn roots. "You're trespassing, destroying my stuff, and you think I should thank you? Are you out of your damn mind?" Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "You're the one out of line," she snapped. "This neighborhood was perfect before you showed up with your sloppy, disrespectful mess. You're a slob, and I won't let you drag us down." The word hit Jamie like a slap, slob. Eric used to hurl it at them during fights, over unwashed dishes or a shirt left on the floor. It wasn't just an insult, it was a knife, twisting into every insecurity they'd fought to bury. Their hands balled into fists, and they took another step, voice dropping low and dangerous. "Say that again." Karen didn't flinch. "Slob," she repeated, slow and deliberate, her eyes glinting with something cruel. "You don't belong here." That was it. Jamie's restraint snapped like a dry twig. "Get off my damn property," they shouted, pointing at the gate. "Now, before I call the cops and have your ass hauled off." Karen huffed, scooping up her trowel like a soldier retrieving a fallen weapon. "Go ahead," she said, turning toward the gate. "They'll see I'm in the right. You'll regret this." She kicked the pile of uprooted flowers as she passed, scattering petals across the grass, and disappeared into the night. Jamie stood there, chest heaving, the silence ringing in their ears. The yard looked like a battlefield, soil churned, flowers mangled, their little haven violated. They dropped to their knees, hands shaking as they tried to salvage what was left. A daisy stem snapped in their grip, and the anger gave way to something heavier, a hollow ache that burned behind their eyes. They hadn't cried since the divorce, but now the tears came, hot and fast, dripping into the dirt. Lights flicked on in the houses nearby, neighbors peering out, drawn by the yelling, but no one came over. Jamie didn't care. They sat back on their heels, staring at the wreckage, Karen's words looping in their head. "Slob. You don't belong." It wasn't just about the flowers anymore. It was personal, a gut punch from a woman who didn't even know them but somehow knew exactly how to hurt. They wiped their face with a muddy sleeve and stood, the beer and pizza forgotten inside. Karen had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Jamie didn't know what they'd do yet, but one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They trudged inside, grabbed their phone, and pulled up the security app. The camera had caught it all: Karen's smug face, the trowel, the destruction. Evidence. Game on, they muttered, saving the footage. They'd need it. Because if Karen thought she could break them, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Monday night loomed like a thundercloud on Jamie's horizon. They'd spent the weekend stewing, replaying Karen's flower massacre in their head until the anger was a living thing, clawing at their chest. The security footage sat on their phone, a silent weapon they'd decided to wield at the HOA meeting. If Karen wanted to play dirty, they'd hit back with proof, let the whole neighborhood see what a nutcase she was. Jamie wasn't sure it'd change anything, but they couldn't just sit there and take it anymore. They'd fought too hard for this house, this life, to let her stomp all over it. The meeting was held in the community center, a squat brick building with fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry bees. Jamie walked in, shoulders squared, the phone burning a hole in their pocket. The room smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener, and about 24 neighbors filled the folding chairs, chatting over a table of store-bought cookies. At the front, a long table held the HOA board, 5 of them, including Karen, who sat dead center in a crisp blazer, her clipboard resting like a crown. She didn't look at Jamie, but the smirk tugging her lips said she knew they were there. The meeting droned through the usual crap, budget updates, a debate about mailbox paint colors, until the floor opened for new business. Jamie stood, heart thudding, and cleared their throat. "I've got a complaint," they said, loud enough to cut through the murmurs. Heads turned, eyes curious. Karen's smirk faltered, just for a second. "Go ahead," said the board president, a balding guy named Ted who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "State your name and issue." "Jamie Carter, 112, Willow Lane," they said, stepping forward. "My issues with Karen Withers. She's been trespassing on my property, harassing me over my yard, and last week she ripped up my flowers. I've got video proof." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Ted raised an eyebrow, glancing at Karen, who sat up straighter, her face a mask of calm. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "Karen, you want to respond?" Karen stood, smoothing her blazer, and turned to the crowd with the air of a martyr addressing her flock. "I'm appalled," she began, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "Jamie's new here and clearly doesn't understand how we operate. As a board member, I'm tasked with upholding our community standards. Their yard, well, it's a mess. Weeds, garish decorations, grass too long. I've issued citations, which they've ignored, so I took minimal action to correct the problem. It's my duty." "Minimal action?" Jamie cut in, their voice rising. "You snuck into my yard at night and tore up my flowers. That's not duty, that's vandalism." The room buzzed louder. Karen waved a hand, dismissive. "I was within my rights under the bylaws," she said. Section 4, Paragraph 3, board members can address violations directly if the homeowner refuses to comply. Jamie's exaggerating to deflect from their own negligence. Negligence? Jamie yanked their phone out, hands trembling with fury. "I've got it right here, security footage of you digging up my plants like some deranged gardener. You want to call that negligence?" They held the phone up, screen dark but loaded, ready to play. Ted shifted uncomfortably. "Let's keep this civil," he said. "Can we see the video?" Before Jamie could hit play, Karen's allies on the board jumped in. A wiry woman with glasses, Marlene, according to her nameplate, leaned forward. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Karen's been keeping this neighborhood pristine for years. You're the problem, Jamie, stirring up trouble over a few weeds." "They're not weeds, they're flowers." Jamie shot back. "And she didn't have permission to touch them, or step foot on my land." Another board member, a guy with a mustache that looked like it belonged in a 70s cop show, chimed in. "You signed the HOA agreement when you moved in," he said. If you don't like the rules, maybe Willow Creek isn't for you. The words landed like a punch, echoing Karen's "you don't belong." Jamie's face burned, and they turned to the crowd, desperate for an ally. Does anyone else think this is insane? She's breaking into my yard, and they're defending her. A few neighbors shifted awkwardly, but no one spoke up. Then Karen stepped forward, her voice rising over the din. "You're disrupting this meeting with your tantrum," she said, loud and clear. "If you can't follow our standards, we'll escalate this, fines, liens, whatever it takes. This isn't about me. It's about protecting our community from people like you." "People like me?" Jamie's voice cracked, raw and furious. "You're a control freak with no life, Karen. You don't get to decide what my home looks like." The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Karen's eyes narrowed, but her smirk returned, sharper now. "That's enough," she said, turning to Ted. "I move we fine them for disrespecting the board." $50. Seconded, Marlene said, quick as a whip. Ted sighed, rubbing his temples. "All in favor?" 3 hands went up: Karen, Marlene, mustache guy. Ted hesitated, then raised his 2. "Motion carries," he muttered. Meeting adjourned. Jamie stood there, stunned, as the room emptied. Neighbors shuffled out, avoiding their gaze, while Karen gathered her clipboard and swept past, her perfume choking the air. "See you next time," she said, low and smug, before disappearing through the door. Jamie sank into a chair, the phone still clutched in their hand, the video unplayed. $50 on top of the other fines, and for what? Speaking up. They'd come here to fight back, to show the truth, and instead they'd been ganged up on, humiliated in front of strangers. The anger churned, but beneath it was something worse, shame, sharp and familiar, like every time Eric had twisted their words against them. They trudged home, the night pressing down heavy. The yard greeted them, still torn up, a silent witness to their defeat. But as they stared at the wreckage, something hardened inside. Karen had won this round, sure. But Jamie wasn't done. Not even close. They'd find a way to hit back, harder, smarter. She'd regret ever stepping foot on their land. The days after the HOA meeting blurred into a haze of quiet fury. Jamie paid the fines, every last one, including the $50 for disrespect, because fighting it felt like punching a brick wall. The stack of citations vanished into an envelope, mailed off with a check that left their bank account bruised, but they couldn't shake the sting of that room, the way Karen's allies had closed ranks while the neighbors just watched. It wasn't about the money. It was about the powerlessness, the way she'd turned their stand into a joke. Jamie kept their head down, avoided the yard, and tried to let it go. Tried. Friday night crept in, heavy with clouds that promised rain. Jamie sat at the kitchen table, picking at a microwave dinner they didn't want, the TV muttering in the background. They'd avoided the garden all week, too raw to face the mess Karen had left, but the guilt gnawed at them. Those flowers weren't just plants, they were a lifeline, a tether to something good after everything had gone to hell. They sighed, shoving the tray aside, and grabbed a flashlight. Might as well check on what was left. The air outside was thick, the kind of damp that clings to your skin. Jamie flicked the flashlight on, sweeping it over the yard. The torn-up flower bed looked worse in the dark, muddy craters where daisies used to be, snapped stems jutting out like broken bones. They swallowed hard, forcing the lump in their throat back down. "I'll fix it," they muttered, more to themselves than the night. "Tomorrow." That's when they saw it, a fresh shadow moving near the fence. Their pulse spiked, and they swung the light over, half expecting a raccoon or a stray dog. But no, it was Karen, her silhouette unmistakable even in the gloom. She was inside the yard this time, past the gate, crouched over the rosebush in the corner. Jamie's rosebush. The one they'd planted after their mom died, a soft pink hybrid tea rose she'd loved, tended like a fragile promise through every season since. Karen's hands were in the dirt, pulling, yanking, the bush tilting as she worked. A pile of torn roots lay beside her, and she was smiling, smirking, really, like she was enjoying it. Jamie's world tilted. "Hey," they shouted, voice cracking as they ran toward her. "Stop it, you bitch." Karen jolted, dropping a handful of dirt, and stood fast, brushing her hands off like she'd been caught pruning her own damn roses. The flashlight beam caught her face, smug, unrepentant, her eyes glinting with that same cruel spark from the meeting. "I told you I'd escalate," she said, cool as ice. "This eyesore's gone too far." Jamie's breath hitched, their gaze dropping to the rosebush. It was half uprooted, its delicate branches snapped, pink petals scattered like bloodstains on the ground. Their mom's voice flickered in their head, "Plant something beautiful, Jamie. It'll keep you steady." That bush had been their anchor through the divorce, through every lonely night, and now it was dying in the dirt because of her. Jamie's voice broke, raw and ragged. "That's my mom's rose. You had no right, no fucking right." Karen shrugged, stepping back toward the gate. "It's a violation," she said, her tone flat, like she was reading a parking ticket. "You should have complied." She turned to leave, tossing a folded paper onto the grass, a final warning, no doubt, before slipping out into the night. Jamie didn't chase her. They couldn't move. They dropped the flashlight, the beam rolling away, and sank to their knees beside the rosebush. Their hands shook as they touched the broken stems, trying to press the roots back into the soil, but it was useless. The damage was done. Petals stuck to their fingers, soft and ruined, and the tears came hard, silent at first, then choking sobs that tore out of them like something feral. They hadn't cried like this since the funeral, since the day they'd scattered Mom's ashes and promised to keep going. That rosebush was her, in a way, a piece of her they'd carried into this new life. And Karen had ripped it apart, smirking the whole time. The violation wasn't just the yard anymore, it was Jamie, their memories, their fight to rebuild. She'd taken a shovel to their soul and walked away like it was nothing. Minutes stretched into an hour, the night swallowing them as they sat there, mud soaking through their jeans. The tears dried eventually, leaving a hollow ache, and something colder took root, a slow, burning resolve. They stood, shaky but steady, and picked up the flashlight. The final warning lay crumpled in the grass. They didn't bother reading it. It didn't matter anymore. Inside, they pulled up the security app, hands still trembling as they rewound the footage. There she was, Karen, sneaking in at 11:47 p.m., her face clear as day under the camera's night vision, that smirk etched into every frame as she destroyed the rosebush. Jamie saved it, backed it up, and sat back, staring at the screen. The anger wasn't loud now, it was quiet, sharp, a blade honed to a razor's edge. "She's done," they whispered, voice low and sure. "She's fucking done." They didn't know how yet, but they'd make her pay. Not with words or meetings or useless complaints, those had failed. This was war now, and Jamie wasn't the pushover Karen thought they were. They'd hit back where it hurt, make her regret every step she'd taken onto their land. The rosebush was gone, but Jamie wasn't. Not yet. They turned off the lights and went to bed, the plan already forming in the dark. Karen wanted to escalate. Fine. Jamie would escalate right back, and she wouldn't see it coming. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the sky mirroring the weight in Jamie's chest. They woke with puffy eyes and a dull headache, the wreckage of the rosebush seared into their mind like a bad dream that wouldn't fade. Coffee didn't help, but it gave them something to grip while they sat at the kitchen table, staring at the security footage still paused on their phone. Karen's smirk mocked them from the screen, a frozen taunt that fueled the fire smoldering in their gut. They weren't crying anymore. That was done. Now, it was about making her pay. They replayed the video, frame by frame, letting the anger sharpen their focus. Karen thought she'd won, thought she could trample Jamie's life and waltz away clean. Wrong. Jamie wasn't Eric's doormat anymore, and they sure as hell weren't Karen's. She'd crossed every line, and lines like that demanded a response. Not lawyers or cops, too slow, too messy. Something direct. Something she'd feel. Jamie grabbed their laptop and started searching. How to stop trespassers, brought up the usual, fences, signs, cameras, but they already had the footage, and it hadn't stopped her. They scrolled deeper, past legal advice and whiny forum posts, until a YouTube thumbnail caught their eye: motion-activated sprinklers scare off neighbor's dog. The video showed a yappy terrier darting across a lawn, only to get blasted by a sudden jet of water, yelping as it bolted back home. Jamie's lips twitched. A sprinkler. A damn sprinkler. They dove into it: reviews, specs, Reddit threads of people bragging about soaking stray cats or nosy delivery guys. The high-end models were brutal: 360-degree sensors, adjustable range, water pressure strong enough to knock you off your feet. Jamie pictured it: Karen creeping in, trowel in hand, then whoosh, drenched and flailing like a drowned rat. The image was so vivid they laughed out loud, a sharp, jagged sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. It wasn't just funny, it was perfect. They found a model on Amazon, the Orbit Yard Enforcer, a beast with a 70-foot range and night vision sensors. Reviews called it overkill and hilarious. Jamie didn't hesitate, clicked "Buy now," expedited shipping, and leaned back, a grin spreading slow and wicked across their face. Overkill? Good. Karen deserved every drop. The rest of the day, they planned. They mapped the yard in their head, where the rosebush had been, where Karen always crossed the fence. The sprinkler would need to cover that corner, hit her the second she stepped in. They'd hook it to the hose by the back door, keep it hidden behind the shed until it was ready. Subtle, legal, and devastating. Private property, their rules. She couldn't cry assault over a little water, could she? Jamie didn't care. Let her try. Sam called that afternoon, his voice crackling through the phone. "You holding up?" he asked. "Heard about the meeting. Sounds like a shitshow." "Yeah," Jamie said, pacing the living room. "And it got worse. She tore up my mom's rosebush last night. Caught her on camera again." Sam sucked in a breath. "Jesus, Jamie. That's low. You okay?" "No," they admitted, then paused, the grin creeping back. "But I will be. I'm getting motion sprinklers. Gonna blast her ass if she comes back." There was a beat of silence, then Sam burst out laughing. "You're kidding. That's genius. She'll lose her mind." "That's the point," Jamie said, feeding off his energy. "She wants to mess with me. I'll mess right back. Soak her stupid cardigan and that clipboard too." "Love it," Sam said. "But, you sure about this? She's unhinged. Might escalate." Jamie stopped pacing, glancing out the window at the ruined yard. "She already did," they said, voice hardening. "This isn't about flowers anymore, Sam. It's personal. She doesn't get to win." "Fair," he said. "Just, be careful, yeah. Don't give her ammo." "I won't," Jamie promised, though the thrill in their chest didn't care about caution. "She's the one who'll look like a fool." They hung up, Sam's warning fading fast. Careful wasn't their style anymore, not after Eric, not after Karen. They'd spent too long shrinking, swallowing their fight to keep the peace. No more. This was their house, their life, and Karen was about to learn what happened when you pushed too far. The sprinkler arrived the next day, a sleek black box with a nozzle that looked like it could punch through drywall. Jamie tore into the package like a kid on Christmas, manuals and parts spilling across the table. They read every word: sensor calibration, spray patterns, setup tips, committing it to memory. The thing was a beast, heavier than they'd expected, and when they tested the hose connection out back, the first burst of water shot halfway across the yard, soaking the shed. Jamie whooped, adrenaline buzzing. "Oh, she's gonna hate this," they said, wiping wet hands on their jeans. They didn't install it yet, too risky in daylight, with Karen's SUV prowling the street like a shark. They'd wait for night, set it up under cover of darkness, make sure it was a surprise. For now, they dragged it into the garage, hiding it behind a stack of old paint cans, and spent the evening imagining her face, drenched, furious, powerless. It felt good. Better than good. It felt like justice. By bedtime, the plan was solid, and Jamie lay in the dark, restless but alive. The rosebush was gone, yeah, but Karen's victory wouldn't last. They'd hit her where it hurt, her pride, her control, and they'd do it on their terms. For the first time in weeks, they fell asleep smiling, dreaming of water and revenge. The sun dipped below the horizon on Sunday, painting Willow Creek in shades of bruise purple. Jamie waited, restless, until the streetlights flickered on and the neighborhood settled into its quiet hum. No headlights swept past, no nosy neighbors lingered on porches. Perfect. They slipped into the garage, the Orbit Yard enforcer waiting like a coiled snake behind the paint cans. Tonight was the night, installation night, and the anticipation buzzed in their veins like cheap whiskey. They hauled the sprinkler out back, its weight solid and satisfying in their hands. The air was cool, thick with the promise of dew, and Jamie moved fast, keeping low to avoid any prying eyes. The shed sat in the corner of the yard, a weathered gray hulk that'd shield the setup from the street. They dragged the hose from the spigot by the back door, uncoiling it across the grass, and positioned the sprinkler just behind the shed's edge. The rosebush's grave, still a raw patch of dirt, lay 10 feet away, the perfect target zone. If Karen came for round 2, she tripped the sensor right there. Hooking it up was simple: screw the hose in, tighten the base, adjust the range. Jamie flipped the manual open, squinting at the diagrams under their phone's flashlight. They set the sensor to max sensitivity, the spray arc wide enough to nail anything crossing the fence line. A test run was risky, neighbors might hear, but they couldn't resist. They twisted the valve, and the sprinkler hummed to life, a faint click signaling it was armed. Jamie tossed a stick into the zone, and whoosh, water blasted out, a hard, arcing jet that slammed the shed with a wet thwack. It was louder than they'd expected, stronger too, the spray glinting in the dark like liquid steel. "Holy shit," Jamie whispered, grinning so wide their cheeks hurt. They shut it off quick, heart pounding, and listened. No lights flicked on, no curtains twitched. Good. They adjusted the nozzle down a notch, still brutal, but less likely to wake the whole block, and staked it into the ground, camouflaging the hose under a layer of mulch. It blended in, a silent predator waiting for its prey. They stepped back, wiping sweaty hands on their jeans, and surveyed the trap. The yard looked innocent enough, wildflowers drooping in the dark, the shed hulking quietly, but beneath it lurked their revenge. Karen wouldn't know what hit her. Jamie imagined her sneaking in, trowel raised, that smug smirk wiped clean by a face full of water. The thought was so sweet they laughed, a low, jagged sound that cut through the night. Back inside, they couldn't sit still. They paced the kitchen, sipping a beer they barely tasted, replaying the plan. The sprinkler was legal, private property, no physical harm, just a soaking. Karen could bitch all she wanted, but she'd have no ground to stand on. Literally. Jamie snorted at their own joke, the tension loosening just enough to let the thrill take over. This wasn't just about the rosebush anymore, it was about every time she'd pushed, every citation, every smirk. Payback, served cold and wet. The clock ticked past midnight, and Jamie's eyes kept drifting to the window. They half hoped she'd show up tonight, test the trap early, but the street stayed empty. Then, around 1 a.m., headlights swept past, slow, deliberate. Jamie froze, beer halfway to their lips, and crept to the blinds. Karen's white SUV rolled by, her silhouette stiff in the driver's seat, her head turning toward the house. She didn't stop, didn't get out, just stared for a long moment before driving off. Jamie's pulse kicked up, a mix of adrenaline and glee. "Come on, you bitch," they muttered, watching her taillights fade. "Just try it." She'd seen them out there earlier, maybe. Jamie had been in the yard all day, pretending to weed, keeping her guessing. If she suspected something, it didn't matter. She'd come anyway. She couldn't resist. They sank onto the couch, the beer warming in their grip, and let their mind run wild. Karen soaked, slipping in the mud, her clipboard ruined, her precious control washed away. It'd be a story for the ages, something to tell Sam over beers, a legend to whisper around Willow Creek. Jamie didn't care if the neighbors hated them after this. Let them. They'd see Karen for what she was, a petty tyrant who'd finally met her match. Sleep didn't come easy. They dozed in fits, waking every hour to check the window, the anticipation a live wire under their skin. By 3 a.m., they gave up, dragging a chair to the back door and sitting there, staring out at the yard. The sprinkler crouched in the shadows, its nozzle glinting faintly, a sentinel ready to strike. Jamie's fingers tapped the armrest, restless, waiting. Part of them wanted to bait her, leave something irresistible out there, draw her in, but patience won out. She'd come on her own. She always did. Dawn crept in, gray and sluggish, and still no Karen. Jamie yawned, disappointment tugging at them, but they shook it off. It'd happen soon, tonight, tomorrow, whenever she got cocky again. They'd be ready. They hauled themselves to bed, the sprinkler armed and waiting, and crashed into a dreamless sleep, the taste of victory already on their tongue. Outside, the yard lay quiet, the trap set. Karen didn't know it yet, but her next step onto Jamie's land would be her last dry one. The game had changed, and Jamie was done playing nice. Monday night stretched into the early hours, the kind of stillness that presses down heavy and expectant. Jamie couldn't sleep, hadn't really tried since setting the sprinkler. They'd spent the evening wired, pacing the house, checking the trap from every angle. The yard enforcer sat primed behind the shed, its sensor glowing faintly red in the dark, a silent promise of chaos. They'd left the back door cracked, the blinds slanted just enough to watch, and settled into a chair with a mug of coffee gone cold. Waiting. The clock hit 2:58 a.m. when they heard it, a faint rustle, the creak of the gate. Jamie's heart slammed against their ribs, and they leaned forward, peering into the yard. The shadows shifted, and there she was, Karen, slipping in like a thief, her blonde bob catching the moonlight. She wore a dark jacket again, trowel in one hand, a flashlight in the other, its beam darting over the ground. She headed straight for the flower bed, the new snapdragons Jamie had planted Saturday, a deliberate taunt. Her lips were moving, probably muttering her usual crap about standards, and that smirk was back, sharp as ever. Jamie held their breath, hands gripping the chair. "Come on," they whispered. "Just a little closer." Karen stepped into the zone, right where the rosebush used to be, and the sprinkler snapped to life. A split-second click, then whoosh, water erupted, a hard, icy jet that hit her square in the chest. Her shriek ripped through the night, high and shrill, as the blast knocked her back a step. The trowel flew from her hand, the flashlight spinning into the grass, and she flailed, arms windmilling as the spray chased her. "What the," she sputtered, voice drowned by the relentless hiss of water. Jamie bolted to the window, heart pounding with wild, savage joy. Karen slipped, her feet skidding in the mud, and the sprinkler adjusted, nailing her again, face, hair, that stupid jacket, everything soaked. She screamed again, a garbled mix of rage and shock, and dropped to her knees, clawing at the ground like she could fight it off. The water didn't care, it hammered her, a cold, unyielding wall, turning her into a drenched, pathetic mess. "Holy shit," Jamie breathed, laughter bubbling up, sharp and uncontrollable. They grabbed their phone, hitting record through the glass, capturing every second, Karen's blonde bob plastered flat, her jacket sagging, her dignity washed away in a flood. She staggered up, slipping again, and the sprinkler pivoted, blasting her ass as she scrambled for the gate. "Yeah, run!" Jamie yelled, voice cracking with glee. She didn't run far. The gate banged shut behind her, and then came the pounding, fists on the front door, loud enough to rattle the frame. Jamie cut the recording, adrenaline surging, and darted to the entryway. Through the peephole, Karen loomed, dripping wet, her face a mask of fury under smeared mascara. "Open this door, you little shit," she bellowed, hammering harder. "You think this is funny? I'll sue you for assault." Jamie laughed again, loud and reckless, and leaned against the door, shouting back, "Assault? You're the one trespassing, Karen. I've got it all on tape, again. Step on my land one more time, and it'll be worse than water." "You're insane," she screeched, voice cracking. "You'll pay for this, I'll have your house, your fines, everything. Go ahead and try." Jamie shot back, their voice steady now, edged with steel. "I've got proof you've been sneaking in here for weeks, destroying my stuff, breaking the law. You're done, you controlling bitch. Get off my porch." Karen pounded once more, a weak, soggy thud, then stopped. Jamie peeked out, her flashlight beam wobbled as she stumbled back to her SUV, leaving a trail of muddy footprints and a soaked, final warning, crumpled on the stoop. She slipped behind the wheel, engine roaring to life, and peeled out, tires squealing into the night. Jamie stood there, chest heaving, the silence ringing in their ears. Lights flicked on across the street, neighbors roused by the chaos, but no one came out. They didn't care. They stepped outside, the cold air biting their skin, and checked the yard. The sprinkler hummed, water pooling where Karen had fallen, the snapdragons bent but alive. The trowel lay abandoned, a trophy in the mud. Jamie picked it up, grinning, and tossed it into the shed. Back inside, they replayed the footage, Karen's scream, her flailing, the glorious moment she'd hit the ground. It was better than they'd dreamed, a perfect, soaking middle finger to every citation, every smirk. They sent it to Sam with a text, "She's toast. Call me tomorrow." Then they sank onto the couch, the adrenaline crashing into a bone-deep satisfaction. They'd done it, stood up, fought back, and won. Not with words or rules, but with something she couldn't twist or ignore. The coffee sat cold on the table, but Jamie didn't need it anymore. They'd sleep like a baby tonight, knowing Karen was out there, wet and fuming, her precious control drowned in their yard. It wasn't over, she'd come back swinging, probably, but for now, this was victory. And it felt damn good. They locked the door, left the sprinkler armed, and crawled into bed, the sound of her shriek echoing in their head like a lullaby. Let her try again. They'd be ready. The morning after the 3 a.m. ambush broke with a brittle, uneasy calm. Jamie woke late, the adrenaline crash leaving them groggy but buzzing with a quiet thrill. The security footage sat on their phone, a golden ticket they replayed over coffee, Karen's drenched flailing, her shrieks, that glorious slip in the mud. They smirked into their mug, the memory warming them better than the brew. She'd be licking her wounds today, plotting her next move, but Jamie had the upper hand now. Let her come. She didn't waste time. By noon, a certified letter slid through the mail slot, the HOA logo glaring from the envelope. Jamie tore it open, expecting more fines, but this was bigger, a formal complaint from Karen, claiming assault with a water device and demanding $500 in damages for her ruined jacket, plus a public apology at the next meeting. She'd attached a blurry photo of herself, soaked and indignant, like it was courtroom evidence. Jamie laughed, sharp and bitter, and tossed it onto the counter. Assault? Over a sprinkler? She was grasping, desperate to claw back control. They called Sam, pacing the kitchen as the phone rang. She's lost it, Jamie said when he picked up. Suing me for $500 because I soaked her ass. You see the video? Hell yes, Sam said, laughing. Watched it 3 times, pure gold. She's got no case, right? Doubt it, Jamie said. It's my property, my sprinkler. She was trespassing, again. I've got footage from weeks back to prove it. Still, Sam said, his tone shifting. She's nuts. Might drag this out just to mess with you. Let her try, Jamie said, voice hardening. I'm done playing defense. The neighborhood buzzed that week, whispers over fences, sidelong glances as Jamie mowed the lawn. Some neighbors avoided them, others grinned, one even gave a thumbs up from across the street. Word had spread, the sprinkler story morphing into a local legend. Karen's SUV stayed parked, her blinds shut tight, but Jamie knew she wasn't gone. She was scheming, waiting for the HOA meeting on Friday. Fine. They'd be ready. The community center was packed that night, folding chairs creaking under a crowd twice the usual size. Jamie walked in, head high, the phone in their pocket loaded with every video, Karen's rosebush rampage, her Snapdragon sneak, the sprinkler blast. The board sat stiff at the front, Ted's bald head gleaming under the lights, Karen beside him in a dry blazer, her face a mask of cold fury. The air crackled, thick with anticipation. Ted banged a gavel, overkill for a suburban meeting, and called order. We've got a complaint from Karen Withers against Jamie Carter, he said, voice flat. Karen, you're up. She stood, clipboard in hand, and launched in. On March 24th, I was assaulted on Jamie's property by a malicious water device, she said, her voice trembling with rehearsed outrage. It ruined my clothing, endangered my health, and humiliated me, all because I was enforcing HOA standards. They've been a disruptive force since moving here, and this proves it. I demand compensation and their immediate censure. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jamie stood before she finished, cutting Ted off as he opened his mouth. I've got something to say, they said, loud and clear. And evidence. Karen's eyes narrowed, but Ted nodded. Go ahead. Jamie held up their phone. Karen's been trespassing on my property for weeks, destroying my plants, harassing me, all caught on camera. That assault. Her getting soaked after sneaking in at 3 a.m. to rip up my Snapdragons. Here's the proof. They hit play, the projector screen flickering to life with the rosebush footage, Karen's smirk, the torn roots, then the sprinkler clip, her scream echoing as water blasted her into the mud. The room erupted, gasps, laughter, a few muffled cheers. Karen's face went white, then red, her clipboard trembling in her grip. That's edited, she shouted, voice shrill. A lie. It's time-stamped, Jamie said, calm now, lethal. Every frame. You've got no right to my land, Karen. You broke the law, not me. Ted banged the gavel again, louder. Enough. Karen, is this true? She sputtered, I was, within my rights, bylaws. No, Jamie cut in. You weren't. I checked, HOA can't trespass without notice. I've got a lawyer friend who says this is vandalism, maybe worse. Wanna test that in court? The crowd hushed, eyes darting between them. Karen's allies shifted uncomfortably, Marlene's glasses slipped, mustache guy coughed into his fist. Ted rubbed his temples, looking like he'd aged a decade. This is a mess, he muttered. Jamie, you've got proof. Karen, you've got a wet jacket. I'm calling a vote, her complaints dismissed unless anyone objects. Silence. Marlene started to raise a hand, but a glare from Ted shut her down. Dismissed, he said. And Karen, step down from the board. This can't stand. What? She shrieked, slamming her clipboard down. You can't, I've given years to this place. And you've lost the plot, Ted snapped, rare steel in his voice. You're out. Karen spun on Jamie, eyes blazing. You're a disgrace, she yelled, voice breaking. You'll regret this. Already did, Jamie said, meeting her stare. When you killed my mom's rosebush. Get out. She stormed off, the door banging shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence. The meeting stumbled on, but Jamie barely heard it. They'd won, publicly, undeniably. Karen was off the board, her power stripped. It wasn't enough to erase the rosebush, but it was something. Outside, the night air hit them, cool and clean. Neighbors clapped their shoulder, some muttering, "Good riddance." Jamie nodded, drained but steady. Karen's reign was over. They'd made sure of it. The weeks after the HOA meeting settled into a stillness Jamie hadn't felt since moving to Willow Creek. The neighborhood exhaled, the buzz of Karen's downfall fading into murmurs over coffee and lawnmowers. Her white SUV vanished one morning, replaced by a moving truck that hauled her life away in boxes. Word spread fast, she'd sold the house, taken a loss, and bolted to some condo across town. Jamie watched from the porch as the truck rumbled off, a faint smirk tugging their lips. Good riddance. The war was over, and they'd come out on top. They didn't waste time reclaiming the yard. The next Saturday, Jamie hit the nursery, loading up on marigolds, snapdragons, and a new rosebush, a soft pink hybrid tea, just like Mom's. They spent the day planting, hands deep in the soil, the sun warm on their back. The sprinkler stayed, though, repositioned by the fence, a quiet sentinel they left armed at night. No one dared test it, but Jamie liked knowing it was there, a reminder of what they'd fought for. The flower beds bloomed again, wild and defiant, spilling over the edges in a riot of color. Jamie added a sign by the gate, wood burned, simple, private property, no Karens allowed. It got laughs from the neighbors, a few nods of approval. The gnome went back out too, chipped nose and all, perched among the daisies like a tiny guardian. The yard wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, messy, alive, and free. Sam came over that weekend, a six-pack in hand, and they sat on the porch, the evening stretching out lazy and golden. Place looks good, he said, cracking a beer and handing one to Jamie. No citations lately? Not a peep, Jamie said, taking a sip. The cold fizz hit their throat, sharp and refreshing. New board's too scared to mess with me after the sprinkler show. Think I've got a reputation now. Damn right you do, Sam said, grinning. The Karen Slayer. Should have seen her face on that video, priceless. Jamie chuckled, the memory still sweet. Worth every penny of that thing. She thought she could break me. Big mistake. She didn't know who she was dealing with, Sam said, raising his can. To fighting dirty, and winning. They clinked drinks, the sound bright against the hum of crickets. Jamie leaned back, gazing at the yard. The rosebush caught the last light, its petals soft against the green, and for a moment, they could almost hear Mom's voice, "Plant something beautiful, Jamie." They had. And they'd protected it. The victory wasn't just about Karen, though. Sitting there, beer in hand, Jamie felt the weight of it settle, the bigger fight, the one that had started long before Willow Creek. Eric's voice crept in sometimes, sharp and cutting, but it was fainter now, drowned out by the choices they'd made here. They'd let him walk over them for years, shrinking to fit his rules, until they'd forgotten how to stand. Karen had tried the same game, control, shame, that slow grind of making them small. But this time, Jamie hadn't bent. They'd pushed back, messy and loud, and won their ground. "You okay?" Sam asked, breaking the quiet. He'd caught the shift in their face, the way their eyes lingered on the roses. "Yeah," Jamie said, voice steady. "Just thinking. Took me a while to get here, you know. After Eric, I thought I'd always be the one backing down. But this," they waved a hand at the yard, the sign, the life they'd carved out, "this is mine." She couldn't take it. "Never had a chance," Sam said, his grin softening. "You're tougher than you think." Jamie nodded, the words sinking in. Tougher. Maybe they were. Not invincible, Karen's barbs had stung, the rosebush still hurt to think about, but tough enough to fight, to hold their own. That was enough. The next day, they found a note in the mailbox, not pink, not HOA, just a plain card from a neighbor down the street. "Thanks for standing up to her," it read. "Yard looks great." Jamie tacked it to the fridge, a small trophy beside the beer caps and grocery lists. Others came too, over time, nods at the store, a wave from a passing car. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was home now, and Jamie belonged in it, wildflowers and all. Weeks turned to months, the seasons shifting. The sprinkler stayed quiet, its job done, though Jamie tested it now and then, grinning at the blast. They heard Karen's name once more, some gossip about her terrorizing a new condo board, but she was a ghost here, a cautionary tale. Jamie didn't care where she'd gone. She was out of their life, and that's what mattered. One crisp fall evening, they sat on the porch alone, a blanket over their knees, watching the stars prick through the sky. The yard glowed faintly, the roses dormant but alive, waiting for spring. Jamie thought back to that first day, the pink note, the ruler, the slow burn of Karen's war. They'd been a different person then, raw and guarded, still licking wounds from a past they couldn't outrun. Now, they felt, not whole, maybe, but steady. Rooted. They raised their beer to the night, a silent toast. "Sometimes you gotta fight dirty to grow free," they said, voice low, the words settling into the dark. The roses rustled in the breeze, and Jamie smiled, small but real. They'd planted something beautiful, inside and out, and this time, it'd stay. And there you have it, Jamie's wild ride against the HOA tyrant, Karen, wrapped up with a soaked showdown and a hard-won peace. Thanks for sticking with me through all 10,000 words of drama, dirt, and sprinklers. I hope you laughed, cheered, and maybe even cursed a little alongside Jamie as they took back their yard, and their life. If you enjoyed this tale, I'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up, drop a like, wherever you're reading this, whether it's a blog, forum, or wherever stories like this find a home. Better yet, subscribe or follow me for more stories where underdogs fight back with grit and a little mischief. Got thoughts? Leave a comment, I'd love to hear what you think about Jamie's revenge or if you've got your own, Karen, story to share. Until next time, keep planting your own kind of beautiful, and maybe keep a sprinkler handy, just in case.